for Snow Australia. Want to welcome everyone this afternoon to the Emerging Talent Program webinar. This is a new initiative for us this year, and it's really about educating, updating everyone on the Emerging Talent Program in 2021. And we're looking forward to getting underway this afternoon and hopefully giving everyone the opportunity to learn about the program and really ask any questions about how the program, how they might fit within the program in 2021. Just a few housekeeping points for this afternoon. We have quite a lot of people on the call, so I'll ask everyone if they can mute themselves, and we'll save the questions till the end of the presentation. And if you do have any questions as the presentation goes along, please put them in the chat, and we'll document those questions, and then we can circle back to them after the presentation. A little bit around why we wanted to do the information session this year through a webinar. Probably the most important part that we saw moving forward, which was a change from the way the program worked in the past, was the transparency around how the program worked. We wanted to have engagement from parents, from athletes, from coaches, from all the performance pathway clubs, and really let everyone understand how the program works, what are some of the key initiatives in the program, and who's actually involved in the program, and what some of the initiatives are that we're going to be doing in 2021. And that's a big change from how we've done it in the past. We took a lot of feedback last year. It was a difficult year with COVID. We weren't able to run a lot of the initiatives that we had planned. Some of the resorts didn't open, a lot of the programs didn't run. So it gave us a good opportunity to look at the program, try and understand it better, and try and put some key initiatives in place and staff in place for this year. We obviously have a lot of good support moving forward from obviously our organisation, Snow Australia, the AIS Sport Australia, with performance pathway funding, solutions grants, which we've been quite successful in securing, and also some commercial partners through the LIM partnership to support the Emerging Talent Program moving forward. Some key staff through some of those funding initiatives have been the inclusion of Ben Bond, and Ben will run most of this session. He came on board as part of a solutions grant. His role being the talent health and performance coordinator for the Emerging Talent Program. And you'll find when you understand his role, it's really about case managing the Emerging Talent Program and the athletes within it, and really trying to work with those athletes to get them to the next level of the pathway, and hopefully prepare them for institute programs such as NSWIS and OWIA. Obviously, Beck Clark, pathway coordinator, she does a huge body of work pulling all the information together and really working closely with the Emerging Talent Program. So welcome, looking forward to this session, and looking forward to hopefully some good questions afterwards. So without further ado, I want to welcome Ben Bond and welcome him into his new role with the Emerging Talent Program, and let him take the presentation away. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ben, very much for the introduction and the welcome there, and a very big welcome to everyone on the call today. We've got some good numbers today, just over 100, I think, registered, which is fantastic, and just outlines the interest in the Emerging Talent Program moving forward, which I think is fantastic, and hopefully we'll be able to utilise today's session as a great opportunity to outline where ETP sort of come from, what we've been working away at in the background, and where we see things moving forward. So hopefully a really constructive session for everyone, and answers a few questions. So we'll essentially work through the outline of the ETP, how it we'll work from the nomination process, which is currently open, through to letters of offer to athletes, and then a little bit about what the program outline might look like and how we will actually case manage these athletes moving forward. I think a big educational piece to the athletes and the parents on the call today will be around how we actually go about identifying this talent and what we actually do in terms of the process that's involved there. And encompassing that is around athlete profiling, and within Snow Australia we've come up with these pillars of development which we base our profiling off to facilitate the development of these athletes moving forward. And then we'll delve a little bit into my role specifically and how I work at case managing certain targeted athletes through the ETP program, and then sum things up with how we envisage things unfolding and the outcomes of the ETP program. Thanks very much for the intro, Ben. Just a little bit more about myself briefly before we continue on. I am a physio. I do have a physio background, working in private practice and elite sport for the past 8 years, and have a really keen interest in the developing athlete, which I think certainly helps with the role that I'm in at the moment, and had some exposure sort of on the developing pathways with the Winter Youth Olympic Games last year, which we were extremely lucky to roll out without too many issues with what's happened in the last 12 months. And at more of a performance level, I am a member of the OWIA Sports Medicine Network, so I'm currently away at the moment, hence sitting in this dark room. It's early in the morning here, but am involved on that front, which will take up a little bit of my time each year also. So the ETP timeline, so just to refresh everyone as to where we're at currently with this, the nomination and application process is open currently. There has been a link sent out to a lot of parents and athletes and coaches and regarding the nomination process and how we actually go about that. And a really big thank you to Rebecca Clark, who Ben mentioned and touched on, has put a huge body of work into developing this application process in conjunction with, consulting with myself, Ben, National Discipline Committee and development coaches. So we think we've got a really well-rounded application and nomination process out there that will hopefully see some interesting applications. Once this closes, we go through those reviews. That's Beck, Ben, myself, and the National Discipline Committee to see where we think potential athletes will sit within the ETP program. And then we envisage by early May this year, there will be letters of offer, and we will further outline the program distribution of how things will look over the calendar year moving forward within that ETP space. So I thought a great opportunity before we delve too much into things would just be to summarise what the ETP looks like and what it is. So it's a talent identification and development program which aims to identify, support and enhance the preparation of potential performance athletes for transition into the performance pathway programs. And I guess the culture and the system that we want to promote within this program is very much supporting and enhancing. But first of all, and what we'll talk about a lot today, is about how we go about identifying those athletes, which is a slightly different process on what has been undertaken in the past. And then I think a really big thing for athletes and parents moving into this who may think that their child is eligible or if the athlete's really keen on the program, is that the idea is ideally for transition into the performance pathway program. So we see ETP as really being the start of the athlete journey, not the end, with the idea that they do progress through in an ideal fashion to the performance pathway programs. And I will just note there that if an athlete or is selected into the ETP tiering system, that it's not a guaranteed pathway through to performance at NSWIS or OWIA level. It gives us a really good chance to provide some good surveillance and develop these athletes, but it's not a guaranteed pathway through, and hopefully provides a great opportunity for that to happen. But there's still a lot of good work from an athlete, coach and parent point of view that needs to happen in the meantime to ensure that that does happen. So the nomination procedure itself, there is no age bracket. It's more around reference to the FTEM and where that developing athlete is within the pathway, which we'll go through a little bit more in a second. The coaches predominantly are providing these applications and nominations on behalf of the athlete. And we had a really productive coaches session yesterday, and the coaches were encouraged to use as much supporting data as possible to try and strengthen that application. In the majority of circumstances, these athletes will be nominated and they're usually a member of a club program. And then there may be just a few athletes that do not necessarily have a coach, and these situations we think will be rare, but we'll just assess those on a case-by-case basis. And as Ben touched on earlier, we do acknowledge that 2020 posed a lot of difficulties with access to resorts and competitions and programs and all of the above, and that's all taken into account in the application process. And we encouraged the coaches yesterday to really draw upon experiences with those athletes over the course of 2020, and then regarding specifics, probably drawing on the best information that they do have available from the 2019 season. So this, if any of the athletes on the call or the parents haven't seen this diagram before, this is with the ETP category. Yep, that's better. Thanks, Beck. This is the FTEM. So this is a model of the athlete pathway right through to participation at F1 through to mastery, which is on the right-hand side at M1. And it's a really great document that just captures the whole continuum of the athlete pathway as they progress through to more of a performance end. This document is available on the Snow Australia website, and we really encourage athletes to have a look at it, parents to have a look at it, to see at different stages what is expected of the athlete in terms of the level that they are at. And then more specifically with ETP, we're sort of looking around this T1 to T3 level of development with these athletes, and then more specifically as we start to target in and case manage these athletes a little bit further, depending on the discipline, we're sort of more looking around this T2 to T3. So if you're a parent on the call and you're a little bit unsure as to potentially whether your athlete is at the level to be recognised within the ETP program, I would encourage you to go onto the website, revise the FTEM document, and essentially, yeah, it provides a really nice summary, and you can kind of correlate that with where you think your child may be at. We promote the athletes and encourage the athletes to do the same and have some self-reflection, and it's a really nice tool for the coaches as well to go through throughout this nomination process. So I thought we'd touch on about how our improved or kind of revamped system of identifying talent will go through things with nominating and identifying talent within the ETP program. There's a few different approaches, and identifying talent, essentially, it's quite a difficult process, and across the world in a variety of sports, no one has really nailed it. It's a complex process that involves a lot of variables, but there's a few different approaches out there. So the first approach, or one of the approaches, is talent discovery approach, and that essentially is saying a winning mindset and talent is already built in, and we should just purely select athletes based on this. And that has a relatively poor predictor of success. There may be times when there's an extremely talented athlete coming forward and they end up progressing through the pathway to be in contention for medals and podiums at world-class events. But typically, if we're choosing everyone for this program purely based off just talent and success at a young age, it has a poor predictor of success. The next one we talk about here, which is a bit long-winded in terms of its description, but essentially it's summarising the environment and the culture that is around the athlete. So that's not just how the athlete's attitude is, but that's culture within the team, the effect that, you know, their friends have on them, the effect that their parents have on them as well. So we view this as being a really important aspect to a developing athlete. But what we'll more talk about today is this talent development approach, with how we're going to sort of case manage and profile these athletes moving forward, and then this essentially results in us coming up with an athlete performance profile, which I'll go through now. So athlete profiling overall, it does enhance our understanding of how the athletes rate their qualities necessary to succeed in their sport, and how they currently feel about their own performance in relation to these qualities. So it provides a lot of self-reflection from the athlete, from the coach, and from the parents. So the coaching staff and support staff work with the athlete. They complete their profiling and develop a plan to enhance their overall performance. And Snow Australia, in conjunction with other industry partners, has developed these 5 pillars that we feel are integral to the development and progression of the emerging talent within the sport. And we've based this off evidence within the literature. We've based it off industry experience and certain qualities of previously successful athletes. We've included that as well. So why do we have this athlete performance profile? It does assist, as I said, in the athlete and the support staff and the parents, importantly, to reflect on areas of strength and weakness. It does address potential barriers to the athlete, coach and parent relationship through just reflection, ideally coming up with some common goal setting. And I think the big one for me as a, managing developing athletes is it enhances the athlete's motivation, engagement and responsibility in their development, and does provide a really nice snapshot of the athlete within their pathway. And I think one of the errors with developing athlete programs in the past has been that, the athlete or the parent or, as someone who's involved or invested within that athlete's development thinks that once they become involved in a pathway program that they won't have to do anything else. So I think this profiling overall encourages the athletes to really drive their own development and then use the resources that we can provide on top of that from Snow Australia and the club programs to then enhance their development even further. So these 5 pillars I was talking about, we have a snowflake sort of scheme here, and we thank Dave Parr, program coordinator from Park and Park, for coming up with this snowflake idea, which I think really works nicely within what we're trying to achieve here. But the 5 pillars are physical being 1, mental, technical, performance, and snow skills, and we'll delve into those a little bit further today. And the first one that I will touch on is the physical profile. So there will be times if athletes are selected into the ETP program that we will look at them from a physical point of view to get an idea of how they are athletically, how well they move, and also do some screening around previous injuries and if there's anything medically we need to be aware of. And what we know is that there are strong links with being more physically capable or athletic or stronger. It does decrease your risk of injury. And there's a moderate link with being stronger and more physically capable, and that leading to an increase in performance as well. So if we can develop these young athletes physically and reduce their chance of being injured and allow you more time for quality training on snow, then the greater improvement that you'll have more quickly. And I've seen it quite often where we have a really talented athlete come through, and this is in a number of sports, but they have a long injury history, and they end up leaving the sport early because they just cannot get the continuity of training to see the development that they need to progress through. So minimising injury risk is very important. This is just an example of some of those physical capability tasks, and some of the athletes on the call at the moment may have been exposed to these tasks previously at different camps or screening days, and then just an example of how we track this data over time, which we can plot into graphs and get a nice measure of how the athlete is developing over time. So it looks at a series of physical tasks, and we have baseline measures as to where we sort of expect different athletes to be at different times, and allows us that if these athletes are not achieving the desired level, that we can kind of target that as an area that we need to work on over the course of a season or an off season, which hopefully will increase their performance and reduce their risk of being injured. And then on top of that, and this will probably be with my role working a little bit more closely with some targeted athletes within the program, but keeping a really close injury and medical profile on them. As I mentioned before, if we have a series of injuries that are managed poorly, they do have a large impact on future success within the sport. So we feel, in talking with Ben and Beck and a few of the development coaches nationally, if we can manage the health and well-being and decrease the injury risk of these athletes from a young age, then we're going to hopefully have them in good physical condition as they progress through the pathway. Moving into one of the other pillars that we talked about within that snowflake, so the mental profile and discussing those intangibles, qualities within the athletes, and some of the ones that we look at quite closely within the athletes, and this is more directed at feedback from coaches and parents also, is the athlete's receptiveness to feedback, what their motivation and commitment is like, how they cope in different situations, and what their overall attitude and effect on team culture is. And this gives us a little bit of a snapshot. It is one piece to the puzzle that we use to kind of track these athletes and how they're developing and maturing on this front as they progress through the pathway. We certainly don't select or deselect athletes purely based on this, but it does give us a good idea as to how they may progress through the pathway. And then delving in a little bit further to the technical and skills profile, that pillar that we look at there, and I thank Hamish Cox from Team Buller Riders and the moguls department here. He's provided us an example of what he looks at from a moguls point of view, and a variety of on-snow exercises and assessments, and then some off-snow acrobatics that Hamish likes to look at with his athletes, and every discipline will be different, and we certainly acknowledge that, but this is a snapshot of how we can grade these moving forward, and add that in conjunction with the other information that we get from the other pillars. Now, this is probably my favourite slide that I will present today, and I think a really nice one for the athletes on the call and the parents to sort of wrap their head around a little bit. It's not absolute, and athletes can move from different areas within this diagram as they do progress and develop over time. But thinking about where the athlete's performance is at currently and how much potential they have, and I like to determine the potential as how much upside does the athlete have to improve from where they are at currently. And if we look a little further, athletes probably around the 1 or 2 are probably going to have a less chance of future success moving forward. They may progress into a 3 or a 4 or a 5 in this diagram, but typically if they're starting from a very low baseline level, or you as the athlete have put in a lot of work over a couple of years but you're not showing great signs of improvement, you probably have less chance of future success in terms of progressing through to the performance pathway programs. Whereas if there is an athlete who potentially hasn't had much on snow time, but we deem them as having a really high upside, they're extremely keen to learn new skills, they're very committed and motivated, they might have a really athletic background that we think can progress to some really positive on snow results, just having more time on snow, and that's just one example. If they come in at around the 7, then they're someone we're probably going to invest a lot more time in compared to an athlete who we deem as having lower potential and being an underperformer. So just an example of how we do look at emerging talent coming forward, and the profiling pillars give us an idea of where athletes may fall into this diagram, in conjunction with a lot of other feedback from coaches and just getting a feel for these athletes on snow as well. So from that, we look at a couple of case examples here, and it's really dumbed down in a really simple form as to how we will look at developing certain pillars out of the snowflake. And the first example we'll talk about is a naturally skilled developing athlete, and this might be within any discipline. So this could be cross-country skiing, it could be snowboard cross, could be alpine, park and pipe, moguls, all of the above. So if we assessed and looked at this emerging athlete on their profiling pillars, and we sort of did a screening and came up with a bit of a summary as to where they're at, this particular example shows that on the left, they're actually really poor in their physical strength, and they've got a lot of previous injuries. We deemed from feedback from the coach that the mental strength is not quite there in terms of coping skills or being under pressure, and this may be a flow-on effect from having all those previous injuries and just not being confident. But this athlete is really talented on the snow, and they're above average in their cohort. But due to the red and the previous injuries and the poor strength, they're not having great performance on snow. So we hope that in time we can, realise that through our targeted assessments, we can improve some physical strength, decrease their risk of injury. Through that, they start to improve from a confidence point of view, and they're still going really well on snow because they have that baseline talent, and they end up improving through their performance. And then we work on that physical strength a little bit further. We educate them about injury prevention strategies. They start to become more resilient and confident on the mental front. And their snow skills, because they're becoming physically stronger and less injured, they're able to spend more time on snow, and this baseline talent improves even further. And then they meet the standards to progress further into the pathway. And ideally, that's how we envisage ETP working, is that we can identify where these athletes are struggling within the profile, how we can work at facilitating development with that, and then hopefully, ideally in time, give these athletes a chance to progress further and into the program with NSWIS or OWIA. The next example I'll talk about briefly is more on the opposite end of the spectrum. This is someone who hasn't had previous injuries, and they're really strong and robust. Mentally, they're not overly receptive to feedback, and this might just be a maturity thing, and we do acknowledge that that's common throughout the pathway, but haven't spent much time on snow overall in their respective discipline, and therefore their results are a little bit below average within their cohort. But we've identified that this athlete is in a sport where physical capability is really important, and if we can just tailor a bit of that on snow element, then we deem this athlete as having high potential for success. So we work really hard at developing the on snow skills. It might be acrobatic performance if that's the relevant discipline, but really working super closely with the coaches from a technical point of view and a skills point of view, to enhance their development on this front. And we know they're strong and don't have many injuries, and they become a bit more receptive to feedback because they're working so closely with the coaches during this time. Throughout the pathway, we capitalise on the strengths, so we don't just put the strengths to the side. We certainly capitalise on that, and this athlete would work on getting stronger and stronger. They're becoming more resilient and confident and receptive to feedback in time. And then with a really targeted approach to on-snow technical skills, they're improving on that front as well, and ideally progressing through the pathway. One thing I would like to talk about is throughout this period, and we don't have a time frame on this, each athlete is different within their journey, but we want to try and reduce any barriers for the athlete to progress in the pathway during this time. And there's multiple barriers that can arise as the athlete works through their program, and we'll just go through a couple here. and would be interested to discuss with anyone afterwards if they have any others that they think are really relevant. So keeping an athlete motivated during their performance pathway is a big one. Having adequate on snow time, and particularly during a pandemic at the moment when everyone's on snow time in the past 12 months has probably been drastically limited. There may be limited cross-training opportunities in the sport that they're involved in, which we see that particularly with emerging athletes as being a really key part in their development. And we can have other sports that do hijack snow sport athletes as well, that may potentially seem a bit more appealing because the sport goes for a longer duration throughout the year. So we need to collectively, as an organisation, and work with the clubs and the parents to come up with ways to keep these athletes engaged 12 months of the year. It may be athlete-coach relationship that does affect how far the athlete goes through the program, lack of resources, injuries, as we touched on, poor physical condition, and that goes hand in hand with injuries, and how engaged the athlete is overall. And it could be team culture. So the coaches are working really, really hard to work on a variety of strategies that promote team culture and keep these athletes engaged, but we acknowledge that this can be one of the elements that does affect an athlete's progression moving forward. So I guess from this information that we can gather on these athletes coming forward, and as you develop through the pathway, we like to summarise this, and this is something that we will hopefully make available through the coaches and to the parents to give an idea as to where the athlete is developing through those different pillars, and whether they are what we deem as being on track for progression through the pathway, if they're progressing nicely, or whether we think that they're actually underperforming and need a little bit more targeted attention to that area. I think this is a nice summary, a visual representation. I think for the athletes on the call, this will resonate really nicely with you, and for the parents also, to give an idea of, and there's an element of subjectivity to this, but we probably gather the information from the coaches, from the profiling that we do, and sort of plot these athletes along the pathway as to where they are currently, where they have been, and then where they need to get to kind of progress further through the pathway. So I think this will be a really nice representation of where the athlete is, and hopefully increase everyone's understanding and improve transparency on this front. And some key points around this profiling overall, and it's really imperative that this information is delivered in a easily digestible format that does promote some motivation to the athlete. It does require not only the athlete but the parents and the coaches to buy into it and to be engaged. And we're developing these athlete profiles over time. It's not just a matter of being accepted into the program and we have a full comprehensive profile on an athlete within a couple of months. And we acknowledge that the athlete will change in time on a lot of different physical and mental and technical fronts. So it's a really fluid piece, a fluid profile that will change as the athlete progresses through the pathway. And we acknowledge that it might just start with questions, reflective questions to the athletes about what do you think you're good at and where do you think you can improve. And that's probably a really nice way to start to promote some reflection around where these athletes are at, and requiring a common understanding from the athletes, the coaches and the parents around how this profiling can assist, and then developing an action plan from that. So this information it's fantastic to have if we have a comprehensive profile, but it must lead to an action. And if we're going to have success from it, we really need to ensure that we're holding up this end of the piece. I would like to touch on a little bit further in terms of my role and how I will specifically work closely with targeted athletes within the ETP program. And if we refer back to one of those initial slides I talked about with reference to the FTEM and more around that T2 to T3 bracket, will be more the athletes that I will be working more closely with on an individual or small group basis. and the access on top of the fundamental ETP program structure, which will include various camps and workshops. These targeted athletes may be privy to sort of coordination of their medical services and their rehabilitation. Coming from a physiotherapy background, I'll be able to work closely with any physios on the ground or external providers if these younger athletes are being injured. The profiling overall will highlight target areas, and we'll be able to work pretty closely on improving certain targeted areas within the profile, but also enhancing their strengths. And then working really closely with the coaches in the clubs, the parents of you that are on the call, working really closely with you and the performance staff to assist in developing these athletes and addressing any barriers that we deem are there to them progressing through the pathway. And an initiative which is sort of in its early days, in its infancy, but I've had some chats with Beck and Ben about an initiative that involves some mentoring from senior athletes within that respective discipline, or previous athletes that have travelled through the pathway for these targeted athletes, which I think will be really exciting. And I suppose our projected outcomes of this profiling overall is that it's clear information for the athletes, parents, and the coaches on the athletes' pathway progress. And this has probably been a little bit grey in the past, or potentially the communication not quite been there to the standard that we hope, just because we haven't had that information being so clear before. So we want to make things really clear and transparent about where each athlete is within the pathway. We hope that from developing these athletes, we end up with an increase in physical and mental robustness. We will support the coaches closely in the promotion of their physical development culture, so becoming strong and allowing more time for you athletes to train, and that starts from a club coaching level. And obviously we'll have a nice tracking database of how these athletes are coming through in time, both from interdisciplines, so looking at, say, for example, what a moguls cohort looks like, to then intradisciplinary as well, and then working through the different disciplines. And then ideally, we want to give the athletes the best chance possible to progress further within the performance pathway. And as I touched on earlier, just being part of ETP, it's not a golden ticket to further progression within the performance pathway. There's a lot of hard work that will need to happen from an athlete point of view, from our end on Snow Australia, club coaching point of view, but highlighting the role of the parents in this process as well, and creating that environment for the athlete to succeed, I think goes a long way to acknowledging that. So it's not just a matter of the responsibility being within the program. There are a number of stakeholders within the athlete development, not just the athlete and the coach themselves. So acknowledging that is really important. And just some take-home messages to wind up before we open up for some questions. So if this performance profiling is undertaken well and delivered in the appropriate way, it can drastically enhance the athlete progression in the pathway. We've touched on in the early slides about culture and how key we see that being, and creating a nice environment from a parent's point of view, a club point of view, and other athletes that are within the program. I've touched on, and I'm quite passionate about this point, but more physically capable athletes have a greater capacity to be available to train and resist injury. And just having seen a lot of junior athletes coming through with numerous injuries that get spat out of the system too quickly, if we can facilitate those athletes being stronger and reduce their injuries, then I think that gives them a good chance. And just acknowledging that different athletes develop at different times as well. You know, not every 14 or 15-year-old athlete coming through the pathway is going to be right on par with each other. Some will develop earlier and some will develop later, and we acknowledge that completely and take that into account with our profiling systems. And then further acknowledging that just because an athlete is successful now does not mean that they will be successful in the future purely in isolation. there's a good correlation with if they're successful now and they continue to put in the hard work and they're in the right environment and in the right program, that they will be successful. But I suppose on the contrary to that, and some of the athletes that may be looked at favourably are those that aren't not currently successful, but we deem them as having a really big upside and a lot of potential moving forward, and they might be some that we invest in within this program as well, which is really exciting. So that essentially sums up the formalities from my end. Certainly open to questions to myself, to Ben or Beck regarding anything with the pathway and where we see that going over the next 12 months, or anything to do with the nomination process and how we go about that as well. So Ben and Beck, we're happy to open up for some questions.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks Ben for that presentation. Really informative, and certainly I hope that everyone has a better understanding on some of the work that we've been trying to do with the Emerging Talent Program. And certainly there's been a lot of thought behind it. There's been a lot of investigation into other sports and even worldwide with how Talent ID actually works. So we have a lot of investment into this area at the moment. We want to put a lot of energy into it, and we see that we have a really good cohort of athletes coming through the pathway, and we want to be able to case manage them and really work with them and their parents and their coaches. So yeah, happy to answer any questions, and yeah, I open the floor.
If anyone does want to answer a question, please just raise your hand, and then you can unmute yourself if that works better. Just so we...
Sometimes no questions is a good sign.
Yeah, I hope so. No.
And I would encourage anyone that does have questions, certainly if you don't feel comfortable within this forum, get in touch by email to either of us. More than happy to have a discussion on that front, or catch up for a brief call as well if we deem that appropriate. So more than happy to facilitate that.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
We've got a hand up from Fran. If you wanted to unmute yourself and ask a question, please feel free.
Oh, hello. Thank you all. That was really, really fantastic. So that explains kind of the back end of the process, but I'm just curious about the actual nomination and the profiling from the coach's perspective. Like, is every child within their program going to be profiled, or like how does that part of it work? Like, how do they actually get to determine who should be nominated out of every child within the club environment?
I can start with that one, Ben, if you like.
Go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Fran. It's a great point, and you highlight that towards the early stages of athlete development within the clubs. I think the first reference point is probably going back to the FTEM framework that I touched on earlier, and each club coach will have an idea as to where each athlete falls within that. And there may only be a select few within the club that are deemed within that, approaching that T1 level of development, and the coaches will have a sort of some background profiling that they naturally do within their own minds as to where these athletes are at in terms of their progression moving forward. But probably the big educational piece from our end is reviewing that FTEM document from a coach's point of view, from a parent's point of view, and an athlete point of view, and having some reflection on where they think the athletes are within the pathway. And that will kind of answer a lot of the coaches' questions if they're going through and thinking, who do I nominate? How many do I nominate? Can I nominate everyone within my club? It will become quite narrow quite quickly once they review that framework and then reflect with their cohort of athletes where they think they are at in the pathway. Does that answer it for you, Fran?
Kind of. What if they're kind of relatively new to the club environment, so they don't have a history of, years of skiing with them or developing with them?
Yep, that's another really good point. And then I guess probably each coach is welcome to put in as many applications or nominations as they deem appropriate, and the coach will probably have a bit of a gut feel as to what the potential of that athlete is, even if they haven't had a great exposure to them over years. So probably going back to where they're at, if they don't have a great database from a performance point of view, but where they think they're at from a potential point of view. And we actually encouraged a few of the coaches yesterday, and a lot have already done this, even from a physical point of view. They might conduct a little bit of their own profiling in the background if they think that they need more information on a certain athlete, and then they will come up with some data there.
Thank you.
Oh, hi Ben. It's Mark Kirby here. So when the athletes get nominated, get chosen, I guess over the season, the Australian season, they'll carry on with their clubs and then just meet up with the ETP every now and again for different training. Just how's that going to work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So essentially, everyone involved in the ETP will complete their club programs, and that will be the fundamental development that they continue to be exposed to. So that will be their baseline level of development. And then, yeah, you're exactly right. We will have various ETP initiatives which we're working at finalising at the moment. There'll probably be something pre-domestic winter, after domestic winter, and then with certain targeted athletes, there'll be some further initiatives as well, and then probably a little bit of online content like there was during the last year with COVID. So that's right. They will complete their fundamental training and development within the club, and then the ETP on top of that provides some initiatives and camps and catch-ups that the athletes will be exposed to. That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Rebecca, if you wanted to ask your question, and then I've got a comment I can read out after that.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you, Ben, for the presentation. I found that really informative. We've conversed via email, so we're based in Calgary, so I'm kind of wondering if this is sort of a program that our daughter sort of does fit within, how would she then kind of be able to tap into sort of the other sort of pieces of the program, like the camps and bits and pieces that you've talked about, like that? How would that all of that kind of work?
Yeah, hi Rebecca. Really interesting point. Being abroad certainly does pose its challenges. Obviously, with any online content, yeah, that would certainly be made available to you. And if we deemed that that things were progressing in the way that we would hope, that there's maybe the potential to have some of these screenings done by someone locally and just link into someone within the sports medicine networks locally to where you are, to just gain some further profiling information and just manage things over the next couple of years. I don't see why that would not be viable, but yeah, that's one of those sort of interesting case-by-case propositions that we'll deal with, and probably, yeah, I think if we link up with email after this, we can certainly discuss a little bit of that further.
Yeah. And then in terms of just getting the profiling and pieces to you, would just be about getting, footage of her riding and things like that. And then you guys can make the determination, and also the information, I guess, from her coach that he will share with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So ski on snow footage would be fantastic. And Ben, if you want to elaborate a little bit further on this afterwards as well, that'd be great. But key on snow footage, I highlighted the slide with those physical capability guidelines, which involve a few standardised physical tests that we look at. So some data around that would be fantastic. And then obviously, yeah, liaising closely with the coach.
Yeah, and I think just to elaborate on that, you know, we're certainly not excluding families and athletes that might reside overseas. And I know there's another question in the chat at the moment about being nominated by other programs, international programs with non-Australian coaches. Absolutely, we want to try and capture all the Australian athletes that potentially sit in the performance pathway, and if they do have a coach, an international coach from another program, then we certainly welcome those nominations. There might be a little bit more of a case-by-case communication stream between Ben and myself, but certainly happy to look at that.
Great. The next question we had from Marilyn, it was very similar to the last one actually, so it might she might already be answered. It was, how does it work if you aren't in a team nor have a coach in Australia? Can nominations come from Park City in US? So I think Marilyn, I hope we've answered your question with the last lot. So if it hasn't, let us know. The next one's from Jen. In previous years, the ETP has been based on age or age cutoff, with the goal post shifting all the time. Last year was the school year cutoff. Every discipline seems to be different ages. Why is it different this year? And is there any age considerations? That was a long one. Did you get that, Ben and Ben? Did you want me to break it down?
So no, I did get that, and yes, and I guess I'll start, and then Ben, maybe you can pick up. It is not age specific this year, and I guess one of the bigger things that we looked at is we have multiple disciplines that we're working with here at the moment. So alpine, cross country, the park and pipe disciplines, and snowboard and free ski, snowboard cross, moguls, you know, and each of those different disciplines have athletes at different phases or different stages of the FTEM and how they progress. So we are trying to capture all at the moment with the nomination process, so it is not age specific, and we think this way of doing it, we're going to be able to work with those individual disciplines a little bit better, and really understand where the athletes are within their own discipline within the pathway. And a good example would be in park and pipe, the athletes are traditionally a little bit younger, whereas maybe in alpine, their development is traditionally a little bit older. So it's just for us to try and capture all, and then hopefully case manage within each of the disciplines. And Ben, maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really nice summary, Ben. And then, you know, not being overly privy to what's happened in the past, but probably where we're heading with things now. In the past, we haven't had the funding and the resources to actually undertake the program as we plan to moving forward. And it's a very evidence-based and strategic approach that we're adopting here. So we just probably haven't had the resources to roll out ETP how we're hoping to going forward. So we see this as being a really positive change within this space and being something which will be around with this format for a long time moving forward, ideally. So that's probably where we've come from and where we're at now, but essentially an increase in resources and then being able to oversee this a little bit more stringently is probably the change.
Great. I think, any more questions? I don't think that's the last one that's come up.
If there's no further questions, I just want to thank everyone for their time this afternoon. Also, you know, a huge welcome to Ben Bond, who's new to the team. Also Beck, who's done a great body of work in pulling everything together, and we look forward to really having a new system with the emerging talent program, and certainly, as Ben and Beck said, if there are any questions moving forward, I'm more than happy to take emails or phone calls offline to answer any questions that we might have. But thank you, everyone, and thank you for your time this afternoon. And we look forward to a good season this year in 2021.
Thanks all.
Thank you.